Well, we're talking about the digital disruption that we are seeing in the Indian telecom market. And one of the issues that is going to require the regulator's attention, an issue that has divided industry, is the issue of the interconnect usage charge. Rajan Matthew, let me come to you. This has been a matter that has been taken up by various telecom operators with the TRAI over the past 48 hours. Now, there are arguments both for and against the IOC. The for argument says that, look, the stressed sector does not need any changes in the IOC at this point in time, because that's going to make things worse. We've spent a lot of money setting up of these networks. A new player should not come and get a free ride, so to speak, on the network. And the argument on the other side is that, look, you've done your cost recovery. In fact, there's been excessive cost recovery, and why hold the sector back when world over we've moved away from IOC? Now, this is perhaps going to be a critical issue that the regulator will need to intervene and take a call on. Make your argument here.
So, Shireen, I think that argument that you just expounded is a bit of a red herring. I think the real argument is as follows. There is not a single entity or government or market anywhere in the world where calling party pays has interconnect at zero. Calling party pays was introduced in India through a regulatory intervention. With that in place, there is no rule or place for zero interconnect. There's always a cost for delivering that call to the other operator and for that operator to terminate. What the cost is something clearly that the regulator must come to a decision on, and that is something that we've encouraged the TRAI to do in an open, transparent manner, where the model that is being used, the assumptions that are made, and the details are disclosed for the world to see and take a look at and to opine on. So that's where we are.
Okay, so Rajan Matthew, if the regulator were to rule in favor of doing away with the IOC, what is going to be the impact on companies like Bharti Airtel, on Vodafone Idea, on the incumbents? What will the impact be financially?
The numbers that are out there, based on what the assumption sets are, is that Reliance JIO will look to gain about 6,000 crore rupees as a saving from if the interconnect is at zero. And the industry together will lose about 10,000 crore rupees in terms of interconnect revenue. So those are the approximate charges and numbers that we are looking at present if it goes down to a zero interconnect charge.
Okay, let me put that point across to Sanjay. Sanjay, the other side of the argument, rebutting the points that Rajan Matthew has made, is that there have been no new investments that have been made in the voice networks in the past 7 to 8 years, that all the spectrum that's been purchased has been done through an auction and it's been fully liberalized. Available licenses are technology neutral. Operators have now got to mainly focus on data, and all investments made prior to 2010 have more than been recovered from business, and in fact there's been an excessive return. As I said, this is the point of view and the argument that's being made, rebutting the argument that Rajan Matthew and the COI are presenting to the TRAI. How would you respond?
So, Shireen, you know, we have seen that over the past decade and a half, the price of interconnect has slowly come down. But the argument around costs has never gone away. I think any regulator in control has always respected the fact that costs need to be taken into cognizance. And I think that argument still remains, because there's a cost of serving the customer, whether you receive a call or whether you make a call. And how do you make sure that there's a fair settlement for that? I think this argument has got very vitiated and has got very murky with the extraordinary premiums that operators end up paying in India for spectrum. I think those costs are absolutely so horrendous that no part of the world loads their operators with those costs. And because of that, I think the resistance, you know, from incumbents is higher and push from the challenger is more. If there was reasonability in this raw material element of the industry, I think this argument would be a lot more docile. It would not be as you know, aggressive as it sounds today. While we talk costs, you know, the regulator also has a challenge to say, how do I deal with the new technologies versus old technologies? Because the fact is that if you are going to load the customer with the legacy costs of a TDM network versus an IP-based network, which probably has much lesser costs, you know, probably that's unfair. So I believe that the golden mean lies somewhere in between. And I think keeping spectrum in mind, keeping new technologies in mind, keeping the old technologies in mind and the sunset for that, I think we need to come out with something. But to say that we totally ignore costs, maybe a little unfair. That's one.
Sure.
Second thing is, I agree with Rajan that in a calling party pays regime, nowhere in the world does it happen. But with data happening, the calling party pays regime will ultimately end. Because in data, you pay for the incoming call and you pay for the outgoing call as well. Because data is charged at both ends. Today, for example, the challenger is categorically saying he's not charging for voice. But I don't think this is a phenomena, you know, this phenomena could change over time. Or regulator might say, okay, let's end the calling party pays regime because everybody is moving into an IP-based technology. And in an IP-based technology, both ends pay. So the calling party comes to an end, and therefore there's a sunset for the termination charges as well. So I'm sure there's a solution possible, but the biggest irritant creator in this whole debate is actually the cost of the spectrum, which has bothered the whole industry big time.
Yeah. Okay, cost of spectrum, that is the reason why we're seeing such a vitiated debate. That's the view coming in there from Sanjay Kapoor. But Madhavan, let me come to you with the points that you've heard both from Rajan Matthew as well as Sanjay Kapoor now. And, you know, this takes me back to my conversation that I had with Rajiv Chandrasekhar just a few days ago. He's written to the Prime Minister as we incidentally also celebrate 25 years of India's telecom success story. It's the 25th anniversary of India's telecom reforms. In that context, he says that there is a need to reimagine the Indian telecom policy, given the changes that we're seeing in technology, given the changes that we're seeing in aspirations of Indians, given the move to data and so on and so forth. As you listen into the arguments, as you've seen what's been announced today by Reliance JIO, what will this reimagined policy need to look like?
It's very simple. I think we have to consider the fact that there is a bottom of the pyramid, and there is what used to be called the universal, access problem is now being converted into a universal data party, if I may say so. So that kind of imagination based on bridging the gap between digital haves and have-nots is what is now gathering steam. But this is an argument from the challengers, whereas the incumbents, as Sanjay Kapoor so very well explained, have this whole balance sheet and legacy issues to clear, and while technologies keep moving on. So some of these issues playing out are very similar to the GSM versus CDMA issues that were playing about 20 years ago. So in the telecom industry, this whole regulation intensive battles are not really new. What is really new is, as I said earlier, the money is not being made on spectrum but on other services. So the people with who've spent huge amounts of money on spectrum, particularly in view of the 2G spectrum scandal, it's changed both the polity of the country as well as the telecom industry landscape. So those issues have to be addressed either by the regulator or for the courts from a simple commonsensical point of fair play. But in business, the point to make is that Reliance JIO's spending a huge amount of money on customer acquisition, whereas the other incumbents spent a huge amount of money on spectrum charges. So it's a question of the cost-benefit analysis on both sides and the risks involved, which is like any business risk. So the more tantalizing question is whether there are net neutrality issues involved going down the line, whether it's getting to be ugly there, and whether there's a walled garden issue based on when you try to combine content, commerce, and access together. These issues will also likely to play out. Well, let's wait for August 15 when JioPhone actually gets launched to see. There is almost a rabbit out of the hat in the fact that you're having a feature phone with all smart features, and not just smart features, but bundled in with a provision. It's like the Ford assembly line. You remember Ford said that you can have any color as long as it's black. We're having a saying that you can have any service as long as it's on your JioPhone. So that is where the assembly line disruption is happening, and that is a fascinating story in which there will be gray areas on regulation, and my own guess is that the incumbents will be fighting more in the regulatory corridors rather than in the marketplace.
Well, haven't we gotten used to the regulatory battles in the telecom sector, Madhavan? But let me put that point to Mr. Baijal. Mr. Baijal, let me start with the second comment that is coming there from Madhavan, which I think is the interesting one, that the assembly line disruption that Reliance JIO has brought about, the kind of regulatory challenges that it is likely to throw up. Let's start with that, sir, and then I'll get you to comment on the IOC debate.
I must say Sanjay has hit the nail on the head, and let me deal with both. Let me also deal with IOC because they are interconnected. You see, earlier IOC used to be much higher. It used to be much higher than 30 paise, and there was another IOC at that time, 5 rupees 20 paise ADC charge. That was a kind of an IOC, and we eliminated them all. The 30 paise was brought down to 10 paise, etc. Because everyone said that IOC is basically a monopoly, so the cost should be broken to the bones. But without going into that question, now there is a very important issue which has to be decided, and I am very grateful that I am not required to decide that issue. And that issue is when you make a WhatsApp. That issue is that when you make a WhatsApp call, there is no IOC, or if there is an IOC, it's in fraction of the original IOC. When you make a call in WhatsApp, you see the picture and you do everything. And the cost doesn't cost you. Now, that is the issue, that in one technology, the cost doesn't cost you, and in another technology, you say, no, what about my cost? So it's a very difficult issue to decide. If we, suppose, we impose a high IUC charge in the name of old investments, etc., the service will close down because the entire services would be taken over by the likes of WhatsApp. Now, there is one more issue I would like to deal with, which is very important today. And that issue is that earlier it used to be a mobile telephone, then it used to be a broadband telephone. But now, you don't know how many things are on this platform. IoT is going to come to the platform, cloud is going to come to the platform, all kinds of things are going to come to the platform, and I don't know what their charging regimes would be, what their advertisement regimes would be. These would all evolve. So we are getting into absolutely fascinating times where we would be required to structure a broadband, come mobile, come so many other connections. And that will be, and those other connections would give, should give a lot of income to the operator, and that is perhaps what Reliance JIO is counting on.
Going back to Madhavan's argument on the toppings, but and Mr. Baijal making it very clear he's very happy that he's not in the regulator's chair at this point in time. But Raj and Matthew, let me come back to you on this marriage of content, commerce and community that Madhavan, I think, so succinctly articulated for us, and that's the big bet that JIO is making. Do you believe that perhaps there will now it will now force the other large incumbents to start thinking of their business model in that fashion much more urgently?
So, Shireen, absolutely. I think going forward, everybody is going to have to look at their business models. And because the future by itself is changing so rapidly because of technology and customer needs and demands. But I think the principal point to be kept in mind is that we have to continue to stay focused on what the customer wants. So today, what we are struggling for is a quality experience on the network. So coverage is important, the speeds are important, low latency, introducing the appropriate technology. I think that's where the principal focus is. What rides on this network is the age-old debate, is it dumb pipe, intelligent pipe, or what else? So I think that's the discussion that will happen as we move forward. How do these pipes robustly put in place gives the customer the experience that they want and need and the applications on demand that they will use? I think that's going to be the principal issues going forward.
If that is going to be where this conversation is headed, Sanjay Kapoor, what kind of challenges do you foresee for a sector that is already saddled with the kind of financial stress that it is?
So I think there are some strategic decisions that now face the industry. First and foremost, most of the incumbents today are operating on multiple technologies. They have 2G, they have 3G, they have 4G, and they're already talking about 5G. They need to make some bets again and decide, do they want to continue with all these multiple technologies, or do they now need to be competitive on the data side and actually migrate to 4G, which becomes the standard? And that's a very important call at one end. The device manufacturers on the other side have to take a call to say, now, do we manufacture 4G feature phones, or we continue with 2G inventory till the market really pushes us out? That's a choice that they have to make. The guys who are in DTH and cable business have to decide to say, are we only going to be screening our content, on the bigger screens, or do we need to have an interplay on the smaller screens as well? And if that is true, then how do we become relevant to the people who watch us on laptops and iPads and on mobile phones? Because that's not even in their ambit today. So I think the whole ecosystem that competes need to reassess its capability, competitive strengths, and redesign their business models. On the other side, I think it's very clear that in India, at least from a perception perspective, the voice tends to be free, right? And it's also very clear that being a very young population, data is going to happen in a big fashion in India. And data to me actually means video. And unless and until all operators, no matter where they are, whether they are the challenger or whether they are the incumbents, if they do not build a video grade experience for the consumers, we'll find it difficult to compete in India, and we'll be globally uncompetitive as well. So I think right now, we all need to concentrate to at least build an access in this country that's globally competitive, and also build a very hardcore, good experience-based backhaul, which allows this whole data to be properly transacted on our pipes. If this does not happen, all the dreams about content and video streaming and all that is very hypothetical. It will never happen. We need to get our access right. It's like saying, let me get my highways right, and the cars will come and the tire companies will come and all that will happen. So I think let's get our virtual highways right. It's important for India to stay competitive.
It's important for India to stay competitive. Let's get our virtual highways right. Mr. Baijal, let me put that question to you. What will it take to ensure that we actually have our virtual highways operating in ship shape? Because if we talk about digital India, if we talk about what the government and the cabinet very recently has just announced and cleared BharatNet 2, for instance, they seek private collaboration. What kind of a pro-investment plan will the government need to put forward to attract this kind of private sector investment and collaboration, for instance?
You see, when I joined 15 years back, at that time, government used to be 90% telecom and private sector was 10% telecom. At present, it's already 90% private telecom. So we have to evolve systems so that the private sector today puts up its infrastructure right and puts up its infrastructure cheap. And therefore, it's very important to talk of the spectrum price. It's very important to talk of the interconnect price. It's very important to talk of the revenue share. The growth in 2000 to 2005, etc., was mainly due to the government also giving a whole lot of concessions, which were also criticized at that time. But today, we can't get out of it. The industry must become, number one, competitive, which already is, and number two, it must become viable. And it cannot be viable for one technology and not for the other. It has to be viable in a level playing field from the consumer point of view. These are very difficult issues to determine, but they have to be determined. India is famous in the world today only because India is known as the mobile nation. So many people have written. Now, that has been possible because the government has partnered the private sector throughout for so many years, and now the government has to partner this broadband and this multiple sector so that everyone is able to increase business and so that everyone is able to reduce costs. We'll have to be very careful that costs are reduced in a manner that the government doesn't reduce costs for one and not for the second. But I'm again stating that costs have to be reduced for the consumer. You can't reduce costs for one technology which is inferior and another technology which is superior. All over the world, most of the countries in the world, 2G has gone. So 2G should go in India also. And then you must quickly determine what are you going to do with that spectrum. In India, we have another problem. All over the world, 300, 400 megahertz was given to mobile technology. In India, the number till a few years back was 100. Now it has increased. It has gone beyond 200. It should go to 400. I understand that it cannot go to 400. There are hundreds of problems in India. But it can surely go to 300. Once it goes to 300, the pooled cost of a spectrum will come down. That is very important. And I said all kinds of interconnections, towers, channels, etc. have to cost lesser. And then no one will be able to catch up. One more thing I'm very thrilled about. All the time we were feeling that no, China is coming from behind and it will capture the handset market because China, as usual, will manufacture its handsets very cheap. Now, for the first time, Reliance JIO has assured that Chinese aspirations will not be, they will not be able to fulfill their aspirations. And there'd be a huge war in that space. For whom it will be good, I cannot predict.
Well, there are plenty of wars that are currently underway and they're likely to intensify. Gentlemen, let me get wrap-up comments from each of you. And Raj and Matthew, end of the road for 2G, at least both Sanjay Kapoor, Pradeep Baijal seem to be indicating that, as does Reliance JIO.
First of all, I wouldn't be too quick to write off 2G. We've got over 700 million customers who still enjoy 2G type services for whatever reason. I think it is incumbent upon us to migrate those to 4G as soon as possible. But let's not forget that we need to make sure that there's an orderly transition, and that's what we should be focusing on as well.
All right. Yes, I agree with you. We have this tendency in India to write premature obituaries. I'm not going to do that on this show, not when it comes to 2G, at least not today. But Madhavan, let me give you your final say on the program today.
Yeah, the first thing I want to say is that it's no longer about telecom, it's about ICE, information, communication, entertainment, and whoever thinks broader is likely to win because basic access is increasingly commoditized to a point of absurdity. The second thing I want to say is that regulation is so important for this game that those who have invested huge amounts of money in 2G and 3G might well end up going to Modi ji. So there could be another G factor there. And last but not the least, I have this feeling that Reliance JIO also has a huge task ahead in maintaining quality and customer service, which is as of now only a promise, and some of the disruptions may not be easy to handle because that's not automated.
All right,
but
Sanjay
it's significant
Kapoor, you get the last say.
It's significant that, may I just add that it's significant that Reliance is investing in an Israeli kind of innovation startups right now with this new fund initiative, and we might see software kind of innovations that will help Reliance stay more competitive. So it's more than a simple equipment-based rollout that the other incumbents have been talking about.
Okay, Sanjay Kapoor, final say to you.
Yeah, I think I would like to comment on both sides of the picture. I think for the first time, a move made by a challenger cannot be overcome by just a pricing move from the incumbents. It's a pricing and experiential move that they need to make to counter the move made by the challenger. I think that's from their side. I think from the challenger's side, while there is a lot to talk about the input measures like 125 million customers, 125 crore GB of data, India being the largest data generating nation in the world, etc., etc. But I think there'll soon come a time when everybody who's there in the industry will begin to look at saying, but what about the top line? But what about the bottom line? And what about the investment returning the 200,000 crores of capital invested in the business. So I think we have responsibilities on both sides, and let's see what happens as we go forward.
Okay, we will have to leave it there. Rajan Matthew, Sanjay Kapoor, Madhavan and Pradeep Bejul, appreciate you joining us here with your thoughts on the disruption that we're seeing in India's telecom market and what it bodes for the future.